We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Vav Amud Beis in Meseches Gitin. This is Gittin Daf 86b. The Gemara is continuing with Rav's understanding of the end case of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah, the case is, let's say you have one aid, and so Rav understands that it's ksav yado and an aid. It's the handwriting of the husband and one aid. And the Gemara continues, V'dafka ksav yado v'aid. It would only be true if it's his handwriting, the husband's handwriting, and one witness. Avol ksav sofer v'aid lo, but if it would be the scribe's handwriting and one witness, that would not be the case. Rashi explains, meaning only if it's his handwriting and one witness would we say that the child is kosher if such a get is used and then she remarries with that get. But if it would be ksav sofer, that would not be true. The child would not be kosher. Maybe you're going to say, we already know that from the beginning of the Mishnah, because what did it say at the beginning of the Mishnah? It said even in a case with no witnesses at all, the child is kosher. Again, assuming here that you have the handwriting of the husband. Ilav seifa, no, if not for the end, then I might think to go even further. If there was one witness with his handwriting, maybe there she could use it to remarry in the first place, but we don't go that far. That's why we bring this case in the Mishnah according to Rav. And the Gemara continues, Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Afilu ksav sofer v'aid. We're talking in the Mishnah even a case where it's the handwriting of the scribe and one witness, Sharei Shaninu, because we learned ksav sofer v'aid kosher, the handwriting of the sofer, and one aid is kosher. Rashi will explain this in a moment. The Rav and Rav will respond to that. Midami, can you really compare the case to what we learned later? Hasam tinasi lechatchila. The case later on is where we allow her to remarry with the get in the first place. But hachadiyevet, here it's all after the fact. She's not really supposed to use the get. It's just if she does use the get, the child is kosher. Ushmuel, but Shmuel will respond to that. Lo kasha is not difficult. Habesafar the muvak. In one case we're talking about where it's an expert scribe. That's where we say tinasi lechatchila. Habesafar the lo muvak. In the case where it's not an expert scribe, that's where we are more strict. And Rashi explains, Dehatanan lekaman bepirkin, we learned later on in the Mishnah in our Perek, ksav sofer v'aid kosher. There it says that if you have the handwriting of the scribe and the aid, then it is kosher. Kilomar ksav sofer v'chasam aid echad kosher. Again, the handwriting of the scribe and the signature of one witness is kosher. V'rav amar lach, but Rav will respond to you, midami, you can't compare it to what we said later on. Hasam kosher lechatchila, because over there, that which we learned later on, when we're talking about the handwriting of the scribe and one aid being kosher, we meant kosher lechatchila. Mashma dehasam chesam sofer imo aid shaninu. Rav is saying that the later Mishnah is talking about a case where you don't have simply the handwriting of the scribe, you have the signature of the scribe in one aid. That's why it's kosher lechatchila. Kedemetaretz la Rabbi Yirmiyah lekaman. That's what Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to answer later on. In other words, Rav holds the later Mishnah is talking about a completely different case. It's talking about chesam sofer, and that's why over there it's kosher lechatchila. So we don't have any Mishnah that talks about ksav sofer v'aid, and that's why Rav says our Mishnah is not talking about ksav sofer v'aid. It's talking about his handwriting and an aid. That's the case where we say vlad kosher. Ushmuel leslei the Rabbi Yirmiyah, but Shmuel does not hold the Rabbi Yirmiyah in terms of explaining the Mishnah later on. Ela ksav sofer. It's actually talking about the handwriting of the scribe. V'lo chesam. It's not talking about the signature of the scribe. And so you see that if you have ksav sofer v'aid, it's going to be kosher. That's from the later Mishnah. And so then the question Shmuel has to deal with is why later on is it considered kosher lechatchila, and here it's not kosher lechatchila. V'ainu tam de kosher lechatchila. So Shmuel will say the reason why it's kosher lechatchila later on, besafar the muvak, is because we're talking about an expert scribe, ubaki b'toras Gitin, somebody who's an expert in the laws of Gitin. V'lo yichtavenu elim shama mipi abal. He's not going to write it unless he heard the instruction from the husband. And the Gemara continues, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan, and similarly Rabbi Yochanan, he also says like Rav. Rashi explains, v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan, kerav, he goes like Rav, the amar ksav yadu shaninu, who says that we're talking in our Mishnah where it's again the husband's handwriting in one aid, avol ksav sofer avlad mamzer. But again, according to that, if it would be the handwriting of the scribe in one aid, then the child would be a mamzer. And the Gemara continues, Amar lei Rebbe Lazar said to him, Harei yesh olav edim, but there are witnesses over here. And Rashi says, Harei yesh olav edim, Rebbe Lazar savar da metziyasakai. Rebbe Lazar is making a mistake, and he thinks we're going on the middle case of the Mishnah where there already are witnesses, and so therefore, what are you talking about that it has to be the handwriting of the husband? That would make no sense. You have witnesses anyway. Who cares whose handwriting it is? Amar lei, so he said back to him, Aseifa, we're going on the end case. Again, this is Rebbe Lazar discussing with Rabbi Yochanan, who holds like Rav. So Rebbe Lazar says, why is it that you need ksav yada? Why do you need his handwriting? Aren't there witnesses? And Rabbi Yochanan Yochanan responds to Rabbi Elazar, Amar Lei HaSeifa, he says we're going on the end of the Mishnah, on the case where you do not have witnesses. So in that case, again, where there's just one witness, the question is, there's not two witnesses, there's just one witness, the question is, does it have to be the handwriting of the husband, or could it be the handwriting of the scribe? And again, Rabbi Yochanan goes like Rav, and says it has to be the handwriting of the husband. And the Gemara continues, Zimnin Amar Rav Teitze. Now sometimes Rav said that she actually has to leave the second marriage, but Zimnin Amar Rav Lo Teitze, but sometimes Rav would say, no, she doesn't have to leave the second marriage. Rashi explains, Zimnin Amar Rav, Bahani Shlosha Gittin Daf, meaning on all three cases in the Mishnah, and this we mentioned earlier, Imnis is Teitze. So what's the halach in terms of if she does get remarried? So sometimes Rav said she has to leave that second marriage, and sometimes Rav said she doesn't have to leave that second marriage. And the Gemara says, Haketzat, how so? Yesh labanim lo teitze. If she has children, she does not have to leave that marriage. Ein labanim teitze. If she doesn't have children, then she does have to leave the marriage. And Rashi says, Yesh labanim kodem sheno delanu shebeget zehat nissus, meaning she had children before we realized that she used this get to remarry. So lo teitze, she shouldn't leave the second husband. Shelo lahotzi laz mamzeres al boneh, because otherwise there's going to be rumors spreading that her children are mamzerim. And again, sometimes Rav said sometimes Rav said lo teitze, and sometimes Rav said in a situation where there's no children, he said teitze, she has to leave the marriage. And the Gemara continues, Mesev Mar Zutra Bar Tovia asks the following question. This is from a Mishnah in Yevamis. The Mishnah is talking about situations of tsaras erva. This is the co-wives of a woman who would be arayas should she do yibum. So in such a situation, generally the co-wife doesn't have to do any yibum, because we say there's no obligation of yibum, because since one of the wives, if she were to do yibum, it would be a problem of arayas. So therefore we say that there is an exemption from yibum. However, the Mishnah says, V'chulan shayu ben safek kiddushin or safek gerushin. What about in all of these cases, if there's a doubt if the erva had kiddushin, or there's a doubt whether the erva had gerushin, so we don't know if this is a tsaras erva or not, so hareilu cholzos v'lomas yavmos. So in that case, the tsaros, the co-wife, should do chalitza and not yibum, because we have a concern, maybe there really is no yibum in this particular situation, but maybe there is, so therefore she does chalitza. And the Gemara says, and the Mishnah says, Ketzad, how so? What is the situation of a safek kiddushin or a safek gerushin? Ketzad safek kiddushin. What's the case of a safek kiddushin? Zarak la kiddushin safek karov la safek karov lo. Let's say he throws her the kiddushin, but it's a doubt. Is it close to her, close to him? Zeu safek kiddushin. That's a situation of safek kiddushin. Safek gerushin. What's the case of safek gerushin? Kasav b'chsav yadu ve'ein olavedim. And so the Mishnah over there says the cases that we have over here. He writes it in his handwriting without any witnesses. Yesh olavedim ve'ein bosman, or there are witnesses but there's no date. Yesh bosman ve'ein bo ela eid echad, or there is a date but there's only one witness. Harezeh safek gerushin. That's considered to be a case of a safek gerushin. And so the Gemara says, V'yamrit lo teitze, if you're going to say like Rav said above, that she doesn't have to leave the second marriage in such a situation, let's say there are no children, she doesn't leave the second marriage if she uses this get, so then sarasa asya leyavume, so then the tsar, the co-wife, is going to think that she's not actually tsara serva, she'll think that it was a good gerushin, and she's going to end up doing yibum. Isn't that going to be a problem? But the Gemara says, no, it's not a problem. To siyavim, let her do yibum, because really on a doraisa level, it actually is a good gerushin. Ve'in bekach klum, that wouldn't be a concern at all. Chashasha de rabbanan, because this whole thing is just a concern of the rabbanan. So the fact that we say lo teitze, and therefore the tzara might get confused and think it's a good gerushin, and therefore she will do yibum, that's not a problem, because on a doraisa level, it actually is a good gerushin. And Rashi explains, V'chulon chomesh esrei arayos shamru shapotros tzarosein min hachalitza. Again, that's the 15 cases of arayos that the co-wife of this woman is potter from chalitza. Im hayu ben lebalein ames kiddushay safek, o shegershin lefnei moso gerushay safek. So again, the Mishnah said, if it's a situation of kiddushin that's a doubt, or gerushin that's a doubt, nimtzas tzarasa safek she tzaras erva. Now the co-wife is a safek tzaras erva, o petura safek she'ena tzaras erva zakukal yavim. So then we don't know, is she a tzaras erva and she's potter, or maybe it's a doubt she's not a tzaras erva and there has to be yibum. So in such a case, harelo at tzaras chotza shem zakuki. In these cases, the tzaras, the co-wife, does chalitza, because maybe again there is an obligation of yibum velomis yamos, but she shouldn't actually do yibum shemaina zakuka, because it's a doubt. Maybe there is no obligation of yibum. If there's no obligation of yibum, she certainly should not marry the brother of her husband. V'nimza nose eishes ach shelo b'malkum mitzvah. She'd be marrying in this situation. You'd have a situation of the brother marrying the wife of his brother, and if there's no mitzvah yibum, that would be a problem. That's why why you don't do Yivam in this case. And then it said, Zeu Safek Gerish, and what's the case of Safek Gerish? And the case is in our Mishnah. The Kavan de Midoraisa Kasha, because since on a Doraisa level it really is a divorce, Zakuk Atzaras Aliyavim, so on a Doraisa level there's an obligation of Yivam. And so the Gemara asked, V'yamr lo seitze, if you're going to say that if you use such a get, so she doesn't have to leave the second marriage, if she uses this get, she can stay married. People will think it's a good get, but tzarasa lav tzaras erva. He and the co-wife is not a tzaras erva. She might come to do yivam. And Rashi continues, Umishaninan, and the Gemara answers, Tisyavim ve'in bekach klum, let her do yivam, let the tzara do yivam, and that's not an issue. Kolomar means to say, Yasi liyavuma, even if she does do yivam because she thinks that her co-wife is divorced, lo ichbis lan kulihai, that's not such a big deal. The nigzar ha to that we should make a gzeira. The kaven to kashim midoraisa, because on a doraisa level, again, the woman who is the erva actually is divorced on a doraisa level. So chshasha de rabbanan bialmi, this is just a concern of the rabbanan, v'lav tzaras erva, it's not an issue of tzaras erva, and therefore, again, if she would get divorced because she sees that the other woman who got remarried with the get was lo teitze, she didn't have to divorce. She used the get effectively, so that's not a problem if she does yibum thinking it was a good divorce, because again, on a doraisa level, it actually was a good divorce. And the Gemara continues, Levi Amar, Levi says, Liolam lo say that in these cases of the Mishnah, in the three cases of the Mishnah, if she does use the get to remarry, she should not leave the second marriage. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and similarly Rabbi Yochanan says, Liolam lo say she should not leave the second marriage in all situations. And Rashi says, Liolam lo say ve'afilo ein labanim, meaning to say they're saying, even if there are no children in that second marriage, still she should not leave that second marriage. And the Gemara continues, V'chein Amar Lahu Rabbi Yochanan livnei Rabbi Chalafta de min Huna. And similarly, Rabbi Yochanan said to the children of Rabbi Chalafta from Huna, Hachi Amar Avuchan, so says your father, Liolam lo seitze, she should not leave the second marriage. And further, another ruling that he has, V'kartzitz sheba'omir, eina posels b'meichatos. The kartzitz in the sheaf, that's not going to disqualify the meichatos. The meichatos are the waters of purification that are used if somebody is tamei meis. And the Gemara explains what kartzis is. My kartzis, what is this kartzis? Amar Abai says, Didvisa de bein akifa. It refers to the fly that's among the sheaves. Mesav Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina. Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina asks on this. It says when it comes to the mechatos, kol ha'ofos, poslin b'mechatos, all kinds of birds, if they drink from the mechatos, they disqualify. The idea is that if they drink from the mechatos, they're going to put the liquid back in. Some of it drips out of their mouth back into the mechatos, and that's why it disqualifies. Chutz min hayona, except for the dove, mimnesha motzeses, because it sucks it all straight up. It doesn't let any water back in. And so the question is obvious. V'misa, now if it is true that also when it comes to the kartzitz, that also when it comes to this fly, it does not disqualify. So nisnish, so it should have said chutz miyona v'kartzitz. It should have said besides for the dove and the kartzitz. Why is the kartzitz not included? And the Gemara says to that lo psikole. The Gemara says to that because it's not clear cut. It's not across the board when it comes to the kartzitz. The gedola lo pasla. If you have a large one, it's not going to disqualify. O katana pasla. But if it's a smaller one, it will disqualify. And the Gemara says, what is the shear? What is the measurement that we know what's considered large, what's considered small? V'ad kama, until what size is considered small? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah v'teimer Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, and some say Rabbi Ami says, ad kazayas, it's until the shear of a kazayas. And Rashi says, ad kazayas, until the shear of a kazayas, umikazayas v'mal, and from a kazayas and upward, have a gedola, that's already considered to be a larger fly, v'lo paslan, it's not going to disqualify. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rebbe Lazar Omer, Rebbe Lazar says, Afapi v'chulu, that even though you have no signatures, but again, this is Rebbe Lazar who holds Eidei Mesira Karti, that it's the Eidim that witness the giving of the get, they create the get. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Halachic Rebbe Lazar beGittin. The halacha is like Rebbe Lazar when it comes to Gittin. What that means to say, according to Rashi, is by get Isha. The halacha is Eidei Mesira Karti. But when it comes to issues that have to deal with mumminus, to shtaros, documents that have to deal with money matters, so in such situations the halacha is not like Rebbe Lazar. As Rashi points out, it's because there's a pasuk in Yirmiyah which talks about signing those kind of documents. Those kind of documents actually do require signatures. Ki amrisa kamei de Shmuel, and so Rav Yehuda said, when I said this halacha from Rav before Shmuel, Amar, so he said, af b'shtaros, the halacha is even by shtaros. When it talks about signing the shtar in Yirmiyah, that's just good advice, but it's not something that is required. And the Gemara says, Rav Savar b'shtaros lo, does Rav say that by other shtaros the halacha is not like Rebbe Elazar? Hakatani v'govim minu chasim meshubadim, but it says in our Mishnah, it says that according to Rebbe Elazar, you can use the document to collect from the chasim meshubadim, from property that has a lien on it, that refers to money matters. And so you see that when it comes to money as well, that Rebbe Elazar says that as well. And the Gemara says, Rebbe Elazar tarti yamar, you're right, Rebbe Elazar said his halacha in both situations. Rebbe Elazar said Eidem Mesira Karti, whether we're talking about get, whether we're talking about other documents. The Rav Savar Kavase B'chadeh, but Rav holds like him in one regard, when it comes to Gitin, when it comes to get Isha. Upalagale B'chadeh, but he argues with him in the other case. He does not agree with him when it comes to shtaros that have to do with monetary issues. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yaakov Baridi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Similarly, Rabbi Yaakov Baridi says that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin, the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar by Gitin. Rabbi Yanai Amar, Rabbi Yanai says, Afilu reach haget ein bo. If you have a get, and you have a get that does not have signatures, it doesn't even have the scent of a get, meaning to say, we talked about the fact that reach haget, sometimes you have a get that's not kosher, but it's enough to render the woman that she's considered a divorcee in terms of disqualifying her from the kuna. And so Rabbi Yanai is saying it's not even that. If you have a situation where you don't have Eidem Mesira, it's not a get at all. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Yanai, Leslie, the Rebbe Elazar, does Rabbi Yanai really not hold of Rebbe Elazar? Is he saying that he rules against Rebbe Elazar? And the Gemara says, no, that's not what he's saying. Hachi Kamer, this is what he's saying. The Rabbanan, he's saying, according to the Rabbanan who argue, and Rebbe Elazar, Afilu reach haget ein bo. It's not a get at all. It doesn't even have the scent of a get. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Amar Reish Lakish, and similarly, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina says, the Reish Lakish says, Halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin, the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar by Gitin. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu reach haget ein bo, and Rabbi Yochanan says it does not even have the scent of a get. And again, the Gemara says, Lema Rabbi Yochanan, Leslie, the Rebbe Elazar. Let's say that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold like Rebbe Elazar, and the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, no, this is what he means to say. L'Rabbanan, again, according to the Rabbanan who argue in Rebbe Elazar, Afilu reach haget ein bo, it doesn't even have the scent of a get. Shalach le Rav Abba bar Zavda lemori bar Mar. Rav Abba bar Zavda sent the following message to Mori bar Mar. Boy minei me Rav Huna. Ask Rav Huna this question: Halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin or ein halacha? Is the halacha like Rebbe Elazar by Gitin or not? Adachi nach nafshe de Rav Huna. In the meantime, Rav Huna died. He couldn't ask Rav Huna. Amar le Rabba berei. So Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said to him, Hachi Amar Abba mishmei de Rava. So says father in the name of Rava. Halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin. The halacha is like Rebbe Elazar when it comes to Gitin. Rabboseinu habekiyin bedvar halacha mishum Rabbeinu amru. And our rabbis who are experts in halacha, in the name of our rabbi, they say halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin. The halacha is like Rebbe Elazar beGittin. And the Gemara now explains who this Rabboseinu is. The Amar Rav Chama bar Gurya Amar Rav. It's Rav Chama bar Gurya who says that Rav says halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin. That the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar beGittin. Ikot Amri, there are some that have a slightly different version of the above. V'chavereinu habekim bedvar halacha. What it means is that our colleagues who are experts in halacha, v'talmidei Rabbeinu mishum Rabbeinu, and the students of our rabbi in the name of our rabbi, Amru halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin. They say the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar beGittin. And if you have that version, the Gemara explains who we're talking about. The Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Chama bar Gurya Amar Rav. It's Rav Chisda. That Rav Chisda said, that Rav Chama bar Gurya said, that Rav said halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin. The halacha is like Rebbe Elazar by Gitin. V'chein kiyasa Rav and Amar Rebbe Elazar. And similarly, when Ravin came, he said that Rebbe Elazar said Amar Rav, that Rav said halacha Rebbe Elazar beGittin, that the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar beGittin. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shnayim shesholchu shnei Gitin shavin. Let's say two people send two Gitin, and they're identical in terms of their names. We can't tell whose is whose. V'nesarv, when they get mixed up, no saying Shneim lazu, he can give. If you have an agent, if you have a shliach, he can give both Gitin to one wife, and then give both Gitin to the other wife, and then we know that they certainly received their proper get among the two of them. Lefigach, therefore, avad echad mehen, if one of them is lost, harei hasheni batel, the second one is nullified, you have no idea whose get it actually is. What if you have 5 people and they write as a generalization within one document, it's going to be a get for all 5 of them? It says ish ploni megarish plonis, so and so is divorcing so and so, ploni plonis, and so and so, so and so. It's including multiple people in the get. And then the Edom sign on the bottom, kulan kasherim, they're all kosher, meaning all of the individuals can use that get. And it should be given to each individual wife one at a time. Now, if it's written the form of a get, the Gemara will discuss what exactly that means, but if it's written as if it's a separate document for each one, and then the Edom are signed all the way on the bottom, as Sha'edom Nikar and Imo Kasher, that which the Edom are read together with it, meaning the one that the document, the part of the document that's right by where the Edom sign, only for that individual is a Kasher, but all of those individuals who are listed above in what appear to be separate documents, so the Edom are not considered to be signing on those documents, and it's not Kasher in terms of those individuals. And the Gemara says, Man Tana, who is the Tan of our Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Delo Rebbe Lazar, our Mishnah cannot be like Rebbe Lazar. De'i Rebbe Lazar, because if it's following Rebbe Lazar, Kevan de Amar Edim Mesira Karti, since Rebbe Lazar says it's the witnesses who witness the giving over of the get that create the gets, Halo Yadi Bahaminayo Kamagarsha, but the Edim who are witnessing it, they have no idea which get is the proper get, which one is being used for the divorce, because there's 2 Gittin being given to each woman, because we have no idea which get is whose. But the Gemara continues, Abaye says, Afilu Tema Rebbe Lazar. You can even say that our Mishnah follows Rebbe Lazar. Ema deboy Rebbe Lazar ksiva lishma, because I can say Rebbe Lazar requires that it be written lishma. It has to be written for the sake of this particular woman. But nesina lishma, me boy, does it have to be given for the sake of this particular woman? Just give both gittin to each woman. And the fact that the witnesses don't know exactly which get is for whom, that's not an issue, because you don't need nesina lishma. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Chamisha shekasu klal v'chul. If you have 5 people and they write a general get that includes all of them in one document, and the Gemara says, Hechi dami klal, hechi dami tofis. What does it mean that it's written generally, which we said it's kosher for all of them? And then what does it mean that you have a tofis for each one, where we said it's only good the part of the document which is connected to the witnesses? Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Man echad lekul, and if you have one date for all of them, zeu klal, that's written in a general fashion, it's kosher for all of them. Zman l'chol echad v'yechad, but if there's a different date for each one, if it's dated each one, so zeu tofis, that's a different form, a different document, so to speak, for each one. Reish Lakish says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph.